But we're going to focus primarily on effectively conveying information either through letters, phone calls to the legislators, or providing testimony, getting together with other people. If you don't remember anything else, just remember to contact our office. The toll-free number from the Big Island is 974-4000. That gets you into the state switchboard. And this is one of the ways your tax dollars are being very effectively used, is each of the neighbor islands has access to the switchboard for free. So 974-4000, and then this little robot will tell you to enter the 5-digit extension, but they don't tell you how to get those. And what it is just the last 5 digits of any of our phone numbers. So our office is 587-0478, and so the extension would be 70478. And that toll-free number will also work for faxes if you choose to fax in testimony, for instance, although it's not as effective for faxes. When this all happens. This is a graphic representation of the calendar year at the Capitol. You will see there that the interim occupies about 70% of the calendar year. This is the most effective time that you have for meeting with your legislators and getting them really to understand what it is that you are concerned about. Once you get into the session, the calendar is incredibly compacted. Each one of those little pie slices represents a major deadline. And so if you wait until the session begins to try to ask your legislator to introduce a bill on your behalf, perhaps, it's probably not going to happen because there's just not enough time. And so make good use of the interim. Get them to come out to your community for the site visits that matter for whatever your matter is. Or get them to get to know you. That's the time to do it. The calendar, the legislative calendar, was posted day before yesterday. And it is on the legislature's website, I believe. And I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But I'll tell you this about last year's calendar. We always start on the 3rd Wednesday in January, because that's what the Constitution says we will do. And we typically have 1 week for bill introductions. And the entire rest of the legislative calendar is devoted to killing those bills off. And whatever is left, in whatever form it's left in, is what will go to the governor. And let me just give you a little bit of numbers here. In our 1 week of bill introduction last year, there were 3,224 pieces of legislation introduced. This is bills only, no resolutions. 3,224 of them. At first crossover, which is the first huge major deadline, when all House bills that are still alive go to the Senate and all Senate bills go to the House, we were down, I believe, to 710 of them. So in 5 weeks' time, about 80% of the bills had fallen by the wayside. At the end of the calendar, we had 250, I believe it was, pieces of legislation that had survived the process, and those were sent to the governor, and of those, 238 became law. And so typically, and this was not atypical, we have about 6.5% to 8% bill passage rate in Hawaii. I have a friend that works at the Utah legislature, and she came to visit me one time, and she was trying to because, you know, there are at least 50 ways to run a democracy. And so she was just flabbergasted that we have so many bills introduced. And we do have a very high rate of bill introduction here, and therefore a low rate of bill passage. And I said, well, Shelley, so how do you do it in Utah? And she said, wow, once we figure out which bills are going to pass, then they finish writing them. And it's like, oh, no, 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 no. We'll stick with too many bills. So, yes.
Yes, I have a question. And anybody at any time, please raise your hand. We'll entertain questions. Of those bills that did not make it in the first crossover, they're not necessarily those that did make it aren't necessarily dead, aren't they? Like held over in committee, perhaps? Maybe yes. Waited till the next legislative session.
That's true. Okay. Anything in the first session of we have a biennial legislature. And so the first, let me back up. I used to say in odd years, which is when the legislature begins the 2-year cycle, and someone pointed out that all years at the Capitol are odd years. But so the odd numbered years, right after an election, then all of the bills that fail to make it through the system, that are either bills that are neither passed into law nor vetoed, are still really alive. And they carry over to the next session. And at the next go-round, they can come back to life at the place that they stopped. They do not have to start all over again. But at the end of the second year of the cycle, the way my friend one time expressed it, he said, "Oh, they're make, die dead, power ready." And it's like, that's pretty dead. So at the end of the second year, then they really would die. But the issues do not die, and the concepts do not die. So they could be reintroduced with new bill numbers. Typically on opening day, there are all sorts of ceremonial things that go on, but the Speaker and the President this year have decided to dress us all in sackcloth and ashes on the opening day and not have the festivities that we often have. That's because they didn't consult me. Our office will have our party that we have every year. We always call it Cheap Crackers and Rich Conversation, so make sure and come and visit us. And I understand that they don't want to spend a lot of money and time on ceremonial festivities. At the same time, I understand, too, that sometimes opening day is the only time citizens come to the Capitol. And even if they're coming for food, they're still coming to the seat of their government. And so always come and visit us. So we will have a good time. At the beginning of a biennium, they will always have the festivities that mark the opening of the session, too. So what's going on here is attempts to make the best laws for the state of Hawaii and for our citizens. I partly put this slide in here because I do come from the Appalachian Mountains, as you had referenced, and my people were coal miners, and we had to farm in the summer if we wanted to eat in the winter. But I really put this in here because it's really important to be mindful that if you don't have to be completely aligned with people to have a working relationship with them that can further both of your agendas. Corn, beans, and squash are very different things. They have different job descriptions. They produce different things. But if you grow them together, you will have inevitably greater yield than if you grew these crops separately. And that's partly because it's less labor intensive. You know, if you're going to grow beans and you're going to go out and pound in stakes in the ground to make the bean poles, well, that's a waste of effort when you could simply grow corn and let the beans grow up around that. So work together with other people, whether or not, and perhaps particularly if you are not completely aligned with them, find the ways that you can be strong together. Because we're a nonpartisan office, we can't really use real legislation to illustrate how a bill works its way through the system to become a law, because that could be perceived as partisan, whether or not it would be. And so we have to be careful about that. And so we're going to track a piece of legislation, the bicycle bill, that would solve all of Hawaii's traffic problems. This is more relevant perhaps in Honolulu than it is on a neighbor island, but I will just mention the first time I ever did this presentation, I did it out on the Waianae coast, and it took me an hour and a half to drive 15 miles, and I thought, okay, I got the right metaphor for this presentation then. And so we're going to introduce a bill that would require everybody in Hawaii to ride a bicycle.